Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. This episode of the Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, AMS Renewable Energy. AMS is a top-tier solar EPC that operates within the precision and mindset of a commercial general contractor. Headquartered in White Plains, New York, and licensed nationwide, AMS has over 30 years of construction experience, tackling even the most complex solar projects with unmatched expertise and craftsmanship. Whether it's a challenging commercial industrial rooftop, ground mount, or full turnkey solution, AMS is committed to best-in-class service and results that last. If you're looking for a solar EPC partner who understands construction inside and out, AMS Renewable Energy should be at the top of your list. Learn more at amsepc.com and tell them the Solar Maverick sent you. Now let's get into the episode. Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. We will be having several in-person events coming in May and June for the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'll be recording a live Solar Maverick Podcast interview at the Mid-Atlantic Solar and Storage Conference on May 6th in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Looking forward to insightful conversation with industry leaders. Also, mark your calendars. The Solar Maverick Podcast is hosting a summer solstice fundraiser to support Let's Share the Sun on June 5th in Jersey City, New Jersey. It's going to be an incredible evening for a great cause. More details will be shared in the podcast show notes. Stay tuned and let's get into it.
If we compare module manufacturing with cell manufacturing capacity, cell manufacturing was only 1 gigawatt by the end of 2024. I don't want any of the listeners to think like, oh, we have not achieved anything. Like, that's not the case. But still, like, just the caveat, like, there is a long way to go still. And taking it back to this energy dominance narrative, there is definitely like more work to do because we have not fully developed a US supply chain yet.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it. Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited to have Sylvia Leyva Martinez. She's the principal analyst of North American utility scale solar at Wood Mackenzie. She also has her own podcast that she hosts. She's the host of the Interchange podcast, Recharged podcast. And I'm excited to have Sylvia on this episode of the Solar Maverick Podcast. We met recently in person in Puerto Rico with Let's Share the Sun. She's going to bring great insights into what's happening with the utility scale solar and storage in the US. Also, obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty with policy. She's also going to talk about Wood Mac's Solar and Energy Storage Summit 2025 that's coming up in 2 weeks, and Let's Share the Sun Foundation. Sylvia, welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Benoy.
Oh, anytime. I'm excited to have you. And I think you could give so many great insights of what you're seeing in the market. We call our listeners Mavericks. So I appreciate, you making the time out of your busy schedule. What would be great is maybe if you could talk about like your background and what you focus on.
Thank you so much, Benoy. And hi, everyone. I am Sylvia Leyva Martinez. As Benoy mentioned, I'm a principal analyst at Wood Mac, and I focus on solar research. So basically, my job is try to estimate how much large-scale solar will get built in the US over the next 10 years, which has been a very, very interesting task over the past couple of years with all the changes in the market. And I've been at Wood Mac for 7 years in Mexico City. Then I moved to Houston, where I'm currently based. And I've been in a wide range of different positions. I actually started back in oil and gas consulting when I first started my career, but then I saw the light and I transitioned to the renewable space. And this is where I'm going to stay, I think, for the foreseeable future.
That's great to hear your background. And, I also, when I first started my career in energy, was in fossil fuels as well. So, and I'm committed to renewables, and that's great that you're doing it as well. It would be great if you could talk about like some of the uncertainties that we've seen in the market the past few years in utility scale development and how that's impacted like what we're seeing now in solar.
Yeah, so I think like even before touching on uncertainty, probably most of the Mavericks already know, a characteristic of the solar supply chain is that it's mostly based out of China. For the US, it's different because over the years, with all this uncertainty, with all the investigations by the Department of Commerce, all the different trade actions, the US has slowly transitioned from importing equipment from China to importing equipment from a range of different countries, mainly from Southeast Asia, right? So, what has created this uncertainty over the past couple of years is that the government has taken very firm actions to avoid any goods that have any ties to forced labor. So, if you remember in 2022 with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, this was like the first major movement that created a bit of uncertainty and I may say chaos in the industry because people was so used to importing modules without necessarily taking a close look on where the materials were coming from. And now buyers were forced to like pay more attention to this issue. And now it made this shift in the way buyers were thinking about procurement and about how healthy and how transparent their supply chains are. So I think like that was the first major change that we saw back in 2022. Now, the change that we're seeing that started a few years back is with all the different tariffs. And there is this effort right now by the Trump administration to have this energy dominance for the US to become self-sustainable. So one measure is pushing domestic manufacturing, and definitely the Inflation Reduction Act has been one of the key pieces of legislation to push this. But also, and it's the topic of this week, is tariffs. So the US still does not have all the manufacturing base that it needs to be completely self-sustainable, at least on the solar side and for many other energy sources. And now there is like this shock in the market because there are so many countries that are going to be affected by these new tariffs that there's a 90-day pause in place, but still we need to see what's going to happen. But still, like there is a shock because on one end, there is like these new tariffs without US source or the US domestic supply. So what are buyers going to do? And that's something that the market is still figuring out and definitely one of the elements causing uncertainty.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, uncertainty creates issues for business planning, and
Yeah.
obviously tariffs have been a big thing. And then, suddenly there's a 90-day pause, and it seems like every day there's something new that's kind of happening that the business
Yeah.
has to adjust. And that's interesting. You started out talking about like traceability, right? With the Uyghur tribes in China and how that like basically impacted the supply chain for solar panels in the US, and we didn't have good traceability. And then you went to the Inflation Reduction Act, and I think it's the 45X tax credit. It basically gives a credit to build manufacturing capability. And then the solar industry, as you know really well, is we've been dealing with tariffs for a while. I know for a lot of
Yes.
industries, it's relatively new. It started first with President Trump putting panels on tariffs and other solar equipment. And then in the Biden administration, they put tariffs as well. And then now, we're talking about tariffs again. And I don't know if you saw this, but like the Solar Energy Industries Association came out a few weeks ago, I think it's end of February, saying that now the US is manufacturing enough domestic panels onshore that they imported, which I was surprised because I thought that would take like several years to do because the Inflation Reduction Act, I think, was passed in August of 2022,
Yep.
I think.
22. Yep.
And then it took a while to like finalize on the details of the different tax credits. And it seemed like it took like a year and 9 months or 2 years. So I'm curious, like, have you seen obviously a lot of domestic manufacturing facilities like opening up in the US? And how has that impacted as well, potentially like the utility scale market?
Yeah, we definitely have. I think, let me just look for the exact number because I want to give something a bit
Sure.
more exact. So, like, if we compare the capacity, module manufacturing capacity at the end of 2023, it was only about 17 gigawatts. Then that jumped to 40 gigawatts by the end of 2024. So it more than double, like from one year to the next. That is
That's
insane.
great.
And that is something that we had not seen in a very, very long time. You probably remember like back in the days, what was the name of the very big like manufacturing company back in the 2010s? Like when the US was actually one of
Edison.
Edison. Yes, there was already a manufacturing base in the US, and then all the turmoil with China happened. not much investment in the US on that end. So we're effectively seeing this renaissance of the manufacturing base in the US, and the numbers, they show it by themselves, right? What is important to note actually is when we think about the entire solar supply chain, is not only the module. So the module is only the very last part of all the supply chain, is mostly assembly. But when you think about the cell, the wafer, all the other upstream components, that's where the story changes. And that's where it seems that there has been not as much investment. Those segments have also grown, but definitely not as much as modules. So when you ask like, oh, are we seeing more US modules in the US? We're definitely seeing that. But then like the main incentive there is getting this 10% bonus adder when meeting the domestic content requirement, right? So that's also one of the benefits of buying domestic, and another incentive for the demand side, in addition to the 45X on the supply side. And there is a tricky part because not all modules that are manufactured in the US necessarily meet the domestic content requirement, because many would need a cell that is also made in the US. And if we compare module manufacturing with cell manufacturing capacity, cell manufacturing was only 1 gigawatt by the end of 2024. I guess we have seen progress. I don't want any of the listeners to think like, oh, we have not achieved anything. Like that's not the case. But still, like just the caveat, like there is a long way to go still. And taking it back to this energy dominance narrative, there is definitely like more work to do because we have not fully developed a US supply chain yet.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sylvia. And it takes time, right?
Yes.
You can't expect it to be done in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Like this is basically rebuilding the whole supply chain. Obviously, it's not just the assembly of the panel, but all the components related to it. And I think
Yes.
we saw during COVID how difficult it was to get equipment. And, obviously it's important, I feel like, to have these sort of critical industries, to have the manufacturing base.
And also, like what many manufacturers are thinking of, like, how are you going to build something or invest this much money if you're not going to have secure offtake? So, this push and pull on a lot of buyers that really want to have US made modules, but also when you compare it to imported modules, the price delta can be quite significant. And ultimately, what many project developers want, and you can tell more about it, is you want to develop the US supply chain, yes, but you also want your projects to be profitable. And the US is still in this ramp up like stage in which there is enough capacity, but there's still a learning curve. There is opportunity still for economies of scale. So module prices have not reached like competitive levels that are good enough, so to say. So they can be like super, super competitive against imported modules. But with the tariffs, now this story is changing by the minute. So obviously there's more to consider there.
Oh, for sure. And I'm sure, obviously as time goes on, we'll have a better idea of how the tariffs are going to work. And
Mhm.
that's amazing. And then what are the major trends that you're seeing in the utility, solar, and storage sectors going into this year and beyond? I mean, it's amazing to hear how many gigawatts came online when you compare 2024 to 2025. Can you talk about what major trends you're seeing?
Yes. So I guess one thing that I like to start with is just the pure size of the project pipeline. So one thing is the projects that actually materialize, but the project pipeline just tells us the interest of the market and gives us a sense of how people are thinking about solar and if there is a future for this technology. So if we only take into consideration the project pipeline, we have about 340 gigawatts in our project database. So if all this capacity were to come online, we would be expecting about 90 gigawatts coming online in 2025, about 80 2026. So it's like that would be amazing. But obviously, there are many constraints, as you may very well know, from like an announced project to having something that is fully operational. But still, I think it's interesting to see that corporates want solar, utilities want solar, everyone wants solar, and we need it like in order to meet these impending booming load that we're expecting over the next few years. So I just think it's very interesting to talk about the sheer volume of interest of the market in solar, and that has just kept growing over the past few years. So just something interesting to consider.
Yeah, definitely. That is really interesting. Obviously, you need the pipeline,
Mhm.
and that's significant. And obviously, it takes time to develop those projects. So it's not all going to come online at once. And then what states are you seeing a lot of, I guess, construction of new utility scale solar?
Yeah, historically, actually, the main states, and this is no surprise to anyone, California, Texas, and Florida. These are the main markets. It seems that for the next few years, they're going to continue being the top markets. Although, for example, Texas, like there is this new, I don't remember the exact number of the bill that was just, I think, passed this
Mm.
week. So that could be detrimental for solar development or renewables development in general. But we're still evaluating exactly what that impact could be. But in terms of like market interest and project pipeline, we're still seeing the state as one of the leaders in the US. So we need to evaluate more exactly what the impact of this new bill is going to be.
Yeah, definitely. That's exciting to hear. And obviously, those are the states that have been leading the way when it comes to utility scale development. And then what like sort of technologies or innovation that you're excited about that could significantly impact solar deployment in the next 5 years in the US? You actually talked about some of them, but it would be great to get more of your perspective.
Yeah, so I think like thinking not specifically about solar, but about renewable energy or even energy in general for the US, anything related to process improvements and like optimization of infrastructure. So, what do I mean by that? Implementation of AI in all the interconnection evaluation processes just to like expedite it, make it more efficient, make all the cluster studies, like really consider all the different variables that they need and all the different projects that are in the queue. I think that would be a game changer. And I know that there are some initiatives already in place in SPP and in MISO to expedite the review of projects in the queue. So if we see like material impact from that, I would be very excited to see that.
Adopted widespread for sure.
So in the US, I think that would definitely be a game changer because projects can last now like 7, 8, 10 years in the queue. For anyone that is making an investment, like you're putting the money in now, are you going to wait at least 7, 8 years to knowing if that project is going to come online? It's too risky. So just having an improvement in that administrative part on the interconnection queue process, that would be amazing. And really hope that we can get some better news on that aspect relatively soon. And the other one is grid enhancing technologies, just like getting more out of the existing infrastructure because it's so expensive to build, it's complex with all the permitting requirements. So it just makes sense. Like you already have a line there. So why not try to squeeze a bit more electrons there? And that would enable many facilities to actually come online and not be constrained by the current transmission infrastructure. So I think those are the two main things that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, those are two great points. It's interesting because like usually the developer's paying for the interconnection upgrades related
Mhm.
to the project, but there's a benefit to having that infrastructure upgrade that obviously helps everyone. And then having, an energy source there too helps with reliability, a new energy source. That's interesting to hear about that. And then it was interesting as well, like how crucial is like energy storage to the future of solar development and how is it evolving? Are you seeing like a lot of solar plus storage or standalone storage utility scale projects?
Actually, like the last in the project pipeline that I mentioned earlier, I think the pairing rate was about 70%. So out of the 300 gigawatts that I mentioned, about 70% were paired with storage. So there has been a trend of having more of the projects announced to be paired with storage. And we need that, particularly in markets that are already highly saturated. We need to have storage because then, with the duck curve, power prices are depressed in the middle of the day where there is more solar production. So that's where the storage comes in, and we can leverage like that additional power available to when it's actually needed at the end of the day. What we have seen so far, but something that we need to take a look at, and this is also a result from the tariffs that have been imposed over the past couple of weeks, is that batteries are going to be so much more expensive now. Like we are doing some preliminary estimates on cost impacts, and we're estimating that storage system prices are going to increase by about 40% as a result of the tariffs, because I mentioned earlier that for solar, the supply has diversified a little bit. For storage, that has not been the case yet. So a lot of the components are manufactured in China. And right now, like today, April 11, at noon, the tariffs are 120, I think it was 125% on any goods from China. So that is having a very important impact in storage system pricing. So this could result in less solar plus storage being implemented just because it's becoming more expensive, and there are definitely going to be projects that are not going to be profitable anymore. So I guess at this point, it's just we need to see exactly what happens and how the tariff situation evolves. But that could definitely have a hit in the attachment rates that we have seen so far.
Yeah, definitely. Those are great points. I mean, it's challenging, like for a project developer, if the price of change is substantially higher to buy to continue to develop these projects, especially because on a utility scale project, like the margins are a lot tighter
Yeah.
to make these projects work. So that's really interesting.
And one more thing, like that's on the price side. And also now we have what happened with UFLPA at the very beginning when it was first implemented, that maybe depending on where the materials for batteries are coming from, they can even not reach US soil. Like it's not even like that it's going to be expensive. It's now that maybe you're not even going to get it because supply is so concentrated in China. It's something that we have discussed internally as one of the possibilities. So we already saw it in solar. So we need to see what happens for storage too.
Yeah, that's really interesting perspective for sure. And it's interesting to me, Sylvia, obviously you have your podcast. You're the host of the Interchange Recharge podcast. Can you tell our listeners about your podcast? And I think it's bi-weekly that you come out with content.
Yes, exactly. I'd love to. So it's something relatively new for me. I started as the host in January, and it has been great because my research is purely focused on solar. So I know a lot of, manufacturers, developers, financiers, and that's like my day-to-day job. But now as part of the podcast, like we explore the main companies, technologies that are driving or affecting the energy transition in any way. So in the past episodes that we've recorded, I've talked to people in nuclear, CCUS, hydrogen, like topics that I know something about. But I think like what is interesting is like many of the questions that I have about those technologies are similar to the questions of other people that are active in the industry, but are not necessarily in the weeds for other technologies. So just trying to understand like what is driving the energy transition or what is preventing that we have more of these technologies on the ground. So as you mentioned, it's bi-weekly. So we just launched an episode about CCUS. I know that is one of the technologies that is also reliant on the IRA. So it's just very interesting to see different perspective on how a completely different technology that is not necessarily linked to renewables, but that it has a role in decarbonization is impacted by all the policy uncertainty. So I encourage everyone to tune in. And if anyone has any like topics that you like to discuss, I'll leave you my contact details there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, well, we could put that on the notes of the podcast, the podcast episode that you talked about, and obviously your email if anyone has any topics. Can you talk about like how obviously you're the solar expert in the US, like can you talk about who your like customers and clients are and what like insights you're providing through Wood Mac or Wood Mackenzie? Maybe about Wood Mackenzie too, if people are not.
Oh, perfect. Yes. So Wood Mackenzie is an energy research and consulting firm. So we cover everything related to energy, oil and gas, power and renewables, metals and mining, chemicals, hydrogen, CCUS, et cetera, et cetera. So everything related to energy, there is someone covering that particular technology in a particular region. So I think it's pretty detailed coverage. In my case, for example, and that would be a similar role of other analysts all across the globe, I study what is affecting utility scale project buildup in the US. And my peer in storage will do the same. My peer in solar in Europe will do the same. So we're pretty focused on the region and the technology we're in. And in terms of clients, like it has changed a lot over the past couple of years. I think it has increased actually. So I talked to many developers that want to understand their competitive position compared to other participants in the market. I talk to banks a lot just to understand like what's the prospect of the solar market over the next few years and what items they should be taking into account when developing a strategy or when thinking about financing a particular player or a particular project. So now like the conversation has been centered mainly on policy uncertainty, trade actions, tariffs, all of that. So that has been very interesting. I also talked to a lot of manufacturers because obviously when we have the outlook on how much solar will get built, that will be a reflection of their own sales. So how many modules they should be expecting to sell, how many trackers, inverters they're expecting to sell. So that's also part of the conversations I have. And not as frequently, but I do talk to like government, and it's just like conversations of what I'm hearing from my conversations in the market. So what our developers are thinking, what our manufacturers thinking, just trying to consolidate the market view and give them a sense of how different policies are being perceived by different players. So it's very interesting. Like I really like my job and I get to talk to very, very interesting people. And like as part of WoodMac also, I've been part of the Let's Share the Sun delegation. So not directly my job, but one of the experiences that I had the opportunity to live while during my time at WoodMac.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know. And then, so how often do you issue like research notes or reports? Is it more of like talking to clients and then also providing some sort of outlook, and like how does that work?
Yeah, so our main report on like US solar is a report that we publish on a quarterly basis in partnership with the Solar Energy Industries Association. So we work very closely with them in drafting the report, and it's all our own research, but it's just a collaboration in terms of spreading the word and getting the report out there for their members as well. So I guess like that is the main report that we publish as a US team. And then for utility scale solar, I also have a quarterly report that is the utility scale quarterly market update, in which we analyze what happened last quarter, who are the main players, the main states where we are seeing development, or the main trends that we're seeing in terms of contracting. Like, are we seeing more utilities or more corporates, contracting models, those kinds of things, focused obviously on the utility scale sector. So that's also quarterly. And then I think like what I spend most of my time on is talking to clients. Like, okay, once the report is out, then we have conversations with clients if they have any question about the report, or even just asking them, like, what are you seeing in the market? So we can start preparing for the next report. So it's a lot of like market conversations, a lot of learning directly from people, and obviously complementing that with our internal project database, because we have a team that is only dedicated to tracking projects. So right now we have a database for US projects that reaches 10,000 projects at different stages of development. So for example, if a developer wants to see other players that are active in a particular market, in addition from them, they can see the developers, they can see the projects, their locations. So I think like that tool in particular is very useful for developers because they get a better sense, like on a project specific perspective, how they are doing compared to their peers.
Oh, yeah, that's really helpful. And you're having so many conversations, and obviously both your clients and then coming up with the market for the outlook, right? And then
Yep.
also too, do you guys like try to estimate like what the cost of the different equipment going forward as well, right? Like the panels, rack.
Yes. And actually, for example, like I only cover market dynamics, but there is an entire team that focuses on solar supply chain. So, like, there's a person analyzing module costs for the US, there
Yeah.
is a person analyzing inverters and trackers, and there is a person with like has all the view for system pricing. So, that person will take the information from modules, inverters, trackers, and you need to add, like EPC costs, transformers, interconnection, all of that. So we have a very big team that covers everything related to solar, and other teams for other technologies, obviously.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean, obviously, people don't know Wood Mac. They should definitely check Wood Mac out. And obviously, we'll have the website. And then also, you're having big conference coming up, Wood Mac. Can you talk about that? And, maybe our listeners might be interested in attending, which is later on in April.
Yes, I'd love to. So the main conference for the solar and the storage team is the Solar and Energy Storage Summit. We do this summit every year, and this year is going to be on April 23 and 24 in Denver, Colorado. So really nice setting for those living in Texas like me. You can escape a little bit of the very intense heat. So good excuse to stay there for a few days. And we cover absolutely everything. Like I'm going to give an overview of what we're seeing in the US market and how the different policy changes are affecting market sentiment, but also build out and pricing. So just trying to dissect all the things that we know so far that are happening in the market, explain a bit more about things that we've heard of that could potentially change over the next few months. And this helps our audience just like be a bit better prepared on how to face all the market uncertainty. There will be a conversation about how to overcome developing hurdles, more technical discussions on module and battery technologies. What else? I don't know. There are like so many topics to cover. Residential, like we're going to cover DG as well. So we have like residential, community solar, CNI, behind the meter storage, all the different solutions that are available. We're going to talk like policy, pricing, everything. So I encourage everyone to take a look at the program. And again, April 23 and 24 in Denver, Solar and Energy Storage Summit from Wood Mac. So it would be amazing for many of your listeners to attend.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have that in the notes of the podcast. Like I looked through the 2 days, it's pretty comprehensive, all the different topics that are going to be covered. And it's interesting. Are you in storage seeing other technologies outside of lithium ion? I know this might not be what you directly cover, but
I don't know if it's a technology that has been fully, I don't know, implemented or as commercially adopted as lithium ion. Like the nickel batteries have also been there, but
for let's share.
area. I couldn't tell you like the share of lithium versus other technologies.
Yeah.
Sorry, not there yet.
No worries. I mean, I'm asking you questions outside of your coverage.
But I can contact you with someone who knows.
And then, we started off the podcast talking about how we met in Puerto Rico a few weeks ago with Let's Share the Sun Foundation. You've been on several of the Let's Share the Sun trips. Can you talk about Let's Share the Sun Foundation and why you got involved? And Wood Mac as well is a very big sponsor of Let's Share the Sun.
Yes, happy to. So Let's Share the Sun is a nonprofit that wants to spread hope through the power of the sun. Like that's their motto. So like the activities that I have been participating over the past few years is installing solar panels in shelters for women victims of domestic violence and their families, and also installing solar panels in communities. Like the main one has been at Juntas in Puerto Rico, where I met you, Benoy. And these families have medical necessities. I was very surprised, and I've noticed this with every trip. It seems like there's a very high percentage of the population in Adjuntas that has some sort of medical need. And something that we don't really think about, or at least I had not considered before, is this link between access to electricity and health. Like in Adjuntas and for all these families, living without electricity means that they cannot put their insulin in the refrigerator because it's not working, or an oxygen machine stops working because there is no power, or like a chemotherapy machine. Like there are so many different stories of people that have some sort of health issue and that they cannot get properly treated because there is no power. And I also didn't know that before going to these trips. We have seen that the island, like Puerto Rico, has been it is severely affected by many different hurricanes and natural disasters. And what is critical in Adjuntas is that when I think it was Hurricane Maria, when it happened, the town was without power for 1 year. Like in Houston, we've been without power for 4 days and I was going insane. I cannot even imagine how it would be not having power for more than a year. So that's where the criticality of the work that Let's Share the Sun does comes in, because these are families. Some of them have generators, but they are diesel power. They pollute. Many of the families have respiratory issues. So imagine you being exposed to all the fumes for the generator. You need to choose between, I don't know, not being affected by not having your machine working or not being affected because of the fumes that the generator produces, right? So anyway, like all this like long story is just like this is the type of work that Let's Share the Sun does. I've been very, very fortunate to join the organization for 4 trips to Puerto Rico, and it's nothing short of like rewarding. And I encourage absolutely everyone that is in the renewable space. I firmly believe that we're in this industry for a reason because we want to make good and we want to improve the world in one way or another. I really, really encourage you to come to these trips because to me, this is like the yearly reminder of why I am in the industry that I'm in. And I don't know, people are amazing. The people that you get to know during the trips, I mean, obviously, I met Benoy, I met Jade, I've met people from many different backgrounds that I think otherwise we would have not met. So I don't know. It's just like an amazing trip. I am a firm believer of what Let's Share the Sun does, and I talk about it to every single person that I meet in the solar space. So I hope that I can meet many of the listeners in a trip soon.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great summary of Let's Share the Sun, your experiences. Obviously, this relationship between renewable energy and health and medical needs. And Sylvia does a great job too of we get to meet with the families, which it's pretty emotional to, and they're very appreciative of getting obviously solar and storage at their homes. And Sylvia does a lot of the translation and is involved in the conversation, which is amazing. And then, as you mentioned, like the great network of people, obviously you're making an impact. I don't know if you experienced this, but we lost power for part of one day in Adjuntas when we were there for those 4 days. I think you didn't experience it because you were at the other hotel.
Maybe. I heard actually, I remember someone mentioning that there was no power one of the days.
I think it was Wednesday, and it's an amazing trip, and it's obviously great networking as well. You have obviously a team from Wood Mac, Clean Capital, Luminous, Jordan Energy, obviously, who founded the Let's Share the Sun, Bill and Nancy Jordan, who are the founders. The other thing that I was going to say, I've installed a lot of solar before, but it was great to see people have never done it before, and then how excited they were about, installing solar and storage and,
Yeah. I was one of those people, like on my first trip. This may sound really bad, but I was excited about going to Puerto Rico and I was super excited about installing a panel because for me, like I do solar research. I've been doing this for a while. I have seen panels in like conferences, but I have actually never installed a panel before. So to me, I was like, when am I going to install a panel? When am I going to install a panel? I was asking Bill and Nancy. And then, like, that's when it hit me. Like, it's more than that. Like that first, I don't know, emotion of, oh, I'm going to start a panel finally. Then I met the team, I met Rebecca, I met the families, and this is the value of the trip. And I got to install a panel. So that's a win-win.
Yeah. And then it's amazing the close relationship you build with the other professionals attending the trip. It's not like thing you meet at a conference. You build a very deep relationship. It was interesting. I spoke at a New York City decarbonization event earlier this week, and then Tien Tien was at the reception. She was so excited to see me. We haven't seen each other since Puerto Rico. And that was like the first time, even though we knew a lot of people in common, that we actually met in person. So yeah, it's amazing, like the friendships that are created from the organization as well and
Totally.
professional network and the collaborations. Look, you have your own podcast. We have you on the Solar Maverick podcast based on that trip. And then as to and I hope you could attend, is that Reneu Energy and the Solar Maverick podcast with Positive Deviancy is having a fundraiser for Let's Share the Sun Foundation on Thursday, June 5th in Jersey City, New Jersey. A link of it on the notes of the podcast, and hopefully, Sylvia, you could attend that event. And then I just wanted to end this interview with, is there anything that we haven't talked about the US solar utility market that you think is important? I mean, we've talked about trends. We talked about obviously the tariffs, things impacting the supply chain and domestic production versus international production, China, Southeast Asia. Obviously, the big conference too, as well, that's coming up, which would be very helpful for our Mavericks to listen to. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think?
I think maybe one more thing that I would add is that even though the panorama seems a bit dark, like with all the uncertainty, things changing, by the minute. I think it's important to keep in mind that like the US needs energy and it needs it yesterday. And there is no way that the country can meet those goals without solar. So, like, for all the Mavericks, just like, hold on, keep doing what you're doing and remain flexible. I think, like, right now, what the industry needs is a bit more flexibility just in order to face this uncertainty. But I know that the industry will prevail. And I feel pretty certain about it that even with all the like changing policy, like all the uncertainty, there is this clear need for solar and there is this clear need for energy, and solar plays a key role in this. So we're seeing this in the project pipeline. We're seeing this in our conversations with financiers, with off takers. So just end with that bright note that solar will stay and it will stay strong over the next few years.
Way to end the podcast. I mean, I think you're right. It's obviously there's an insatiable appetite for power generation in the US that's going to increase exponentially with obviously like AI and data centers and other things coming online. And then all forms of energy, right, is important. And solar is the fastest energy resource to be able to come online versus other technologies. And one thing too, which the Let's Hear the Sun trip actually reinforced in my mind, was energy independence.
Yes.
You'll hear that a lot in Puerto Rico, and I don't think we appreciate it in the US because we are not impacted, as you said, by power outages like other parts of the world. And I think you're going to see more power outages in the US. I'm starting to see this actually, where it's happening more and more, because the infrastructure is relatively old and we're not getting new generation online. But if you think about like even those families, we install solar and storage for Let's Share the Sun, like now they're independent from the grid.
Yeah.
And that creates opportunity for them, obviously health needs, but then also, it obviously impacts a lot of other things, which obviously for medical. So it's just interesting because that kind of reinforced me like the energy independence. And in the US, we talk about independence all the time. So, obviously, if you have the capability of having solar and storage, it's definitely worthwhile economically, but then also, to control your own future in the future. So.
Amen.
Amen. Sorry, I went into that. I thought that's an important point. I think we should be reinforcing it as an industry because it seems like obviously Americans are about independence, but they don't really think about, hey, we could be energy independent. And that's an important thing, especially with everything that's going on.
And sorry, one more point to add. It's very curious, like one of the trends that I have also seen, not necessarily on the like technology or implementation side, it's just a change of narrative. Like with the Biden administration, the buzzwords were decarbonization, climate change, clean energy. Now, like it seems like that is a thing of the past. Now it's more about energy independence, energy dominance. Like that's what the new administration is focused on. And gladly, solar and storage and wind provide that. I guess it's just a matter of education or more like a broader conversation with the government about the role that solar plays in this energy independence, energy dominance conversation.
That's a great point to end the podcast on. You're right. It's about the vernacular and us as an industry educating, right, the government about these are important things that for America's prosperity that we do need. And energy independence, energy domination is a part of it. And solar is a big storage, wind, all these different technologies are a part of it. And this has been an amazing interview. I appreciate your time today, Sylvia. I know we had some issues in the beginning. I apologize. But what's the best way for our Mavericks to learn about you and obviously your podcast and other great work that Wood Mackenzie is doing?
Yeah, so obviously, like the podcast, I invite everyone tune in. And also, I post a lot on LinkedIn. Most of it is related to solar, so you might be interested in it. So we can leave my profile in the comment notes. And if you would like to learn more about WoodMac, visit woodmac.com and you can see all the wide breadth of research that is available there. So looking forward to connecting with everyone.
That's amazing. Thank you, Sylvia. I appreciate it. Great to collaborate on this podcast episode. I'm excited to listen. I listened to several episodes before we had our interview, and I'm excited to listen to more of your content. Keep doing the great work that you're doing, and thank you for your time today.
I appreciate it, Benoy. Thank you so much. It has been really fun.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Reneu Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@reneuenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.